back. Mary broke her back, and then things started. Hyatt the same weekend broke his hand, had to have surgery on his hand, and then Rebecca had to have a jaw bone graft. All in the same. That was within a 2-week period of time. Okay, I was like, okay. People ask, how are things going? I'm like, oh, things are going way better now, because compared to that which we had just gone through, it was way better. And then immediately after that, things got hard again. And so we kept having Hey, Kyle.
Hey Cameron, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing pretty good. We both before we got on talked about how busy we are, but with busyness comes goodness, right? Generally,
Hmm.
generally it does. So why don't you start, Cameron? We talked a little bit about focusing more on specific subjects. So tell me what you got on your
Yeah.
mind, Cameron.
Well, so yesterday my son uh, gave a talk in church, and it was a fantastic talk. And it's a milestone because he's about to start a service mission for our church, where he's going to dedicate 2 years of his life to serving in our community. And it's not something you would expect from 19-year-olds to do, right? It's a little bit of an unusual thing. And a good friend of ours, who probably has more influence on us than she possibly can realize, asked me a question. She goes, how is it watching him up there talk in church, knowing that 2.5, 3 years ago, he was suicidal and self-injury and all of these things? And it was great timing, because I had just had the talk with him 2 days before that, talking about, wow, look at where you're at. Look at where you're at compared to where you were 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And, he used this expression. He said, it seems like it's overly dramatic to say I was near death, but I was near death and now I'm not. And I get what he was saying, because, when he was suicidal and he wrote his notes and had his attempts, it was, he he could have been successful, and his journey in mortality would be over. And yet now, 2 years later, he's serving his community and he's focused in on good things, and his bad days are way better than his best days used to be.
That's so the point here is, do we take I guess you're asking, do we take the time to look back?
Hmm.
And one of my lessons I call it. It's about comparisons, right?
Yeah.
Comparing yourself to your previous self, or sometimes comparing yourself to others. And it can be a trap, but it can also motivate you, right?
Yeah.
And so we've got to. I think what ends up happening, and this is just me, so I'm going to speak from my personal experience. Um, I can work at something. I can lose myself in working on something,
Hmm.
and then accomplish it without even really knowing it, or at least be closer to. And I think we've all struggled with this at times, right?
Yeah.
Where we're so busy in the activity or focused on the day to day of it that the unattainable goal may have already come and gone, and we're right. And,
Yeah.
and
I,
that happens periodically.
I think what the issue you're describing is, the most important things in life don't have a finish line. So you never cross it. So if you're never crossing it, how do you tell if you're doing better than you were before? Because
How do you
how,
win? How do you win?
how do you
Right?
win? What does it look
How do you
like to
win?
win? Yeah.
And I've got a story that goes along with that, because years ago Shelly and I were struggling with our kids, and I had read a book years ago. I think it's called Imaging, and it's by one of those, the original Napoleon Hill guys, or
Okay. Yeah.
there's 5 or 6 guys that come from that generation that wrote a lot of self-help stuff.
Yeah.
but this one's called Imaging. And at the time we were struggling, the book says basically you should imagine what you want your future to be like and vividly picture it and add colors and, you know, noises and maybe a musical background. And it really requires you to stop everything and think about it real deeply. And at the time, we were struggling so much that I remember imagining, my perfect future. And in the perfect future, I had my kids walking around, getting along with each other, and my wife and I were loving on each other, and everything was beautiful, and there was no conflict, right? And I remember going through this, and I actually imagined the perfect world. And then I caught myself after a few minutes saying, "Wait a minute. If I'm assuming someday my kids are going to grow up and there's going to be no conflict between my boys and me or my wife and me, or that's just kind of a false reality." And so I kind of had to reset what, and I'm not going to call it perfection. I'm going to call it, a future happiness or a future joy would look like.
Hmm.
And it was a little different than the perfect world, right? It was a little
Okay.
different than utopia, right? But it was the attempts as we face challenges to get along or to go through them with the right spirit or and I remember kind of writing down, and I'm a writer. I'll sit down and write down kind of some of the things that I think I can do that'll get us closer to that eventual joyful happy family that in general wants to get along and
Hmm.
faces conflict with the right kind of spirit and those kind of things. And I kind of made the activities that I thought would lead us there kind of a habit. And I would like to think that a lot of my became more my patterns than the past. And I think I kind of forgot about that, the imaging or what I had done. But it was interesting because just a few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I remember we went over to the park together as a family, and I was wearing flip flops, and turns out they needed an extra basketball player, and I wasn't really prepared to play,
Right.
but it was just a goofy game, and I thought I'll just go out there in my flip flops and just walk around and make a few passes, and the
Sure.
competition got a little hotter, and the next thing I know, I twist my knee,
Oh.
right, and so I have to get off the court, and because I twisted my knee, I was walking so weird for the next couple of days. I ended up wrenching my back real bad,
Oh
and I
yeah.
went through a week of this pain before the Friday night after that comes along, and my wife says, "Here's the deal, Kyle. You need to stop and just rest and just sit in the chair and ice your back, and I'll take care of things this weekend. You just sit there. I got it. I want you to get better because I can tell you're not going to stop going, and you're not going to get
Hmm.
better unless you stop." And I remember sitting on the couch or on the chair. I have a lazy boy, and I was sitting on that chair, and I just watched that weekend. I watched my family interact and tool around, and by Saturday night, I realized that a lot of the things that I had wanted to predict a happy family would look like was kind of what was going in our home.
Wow, that's
And
cool.
I saw my kids getting along, and even though there was conflict, they managed it well, and they figured some things out. And you know, my wife was taking good care of me when I needed her to, and it was just really kind of a it took a twisted knee and a hurt back for me to stop moving forward so much that I could sit back and kind of view from the outside in.
Hmm.
And it was interesting to see that I had lost myself in the activity so much that I didn't realize I was living in the kind of world that I really wanted to live in, that I had kind of imaged, to a certain extent. Um, but it was, I think, imagining it, first of all, and everything being perfect, I think was a good exercise because I realized that's not reality,
Sure.
you know? And so I was able to readjust and say, okay, we want our kids to be, you know, emotionally resilient and strong and kind and loving, and they're on their path to treating the world that way, and all the things that we imagine. And the relationship they had with my wife was good, and these are the things that, like you said, they're the things that there's no finish line to. So we rarely get a chance to look at, the results sometimes of our efforts.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also sometimes the other side of that is, even if things are going well, I think sometimes, and I'm guilty of this, is I'm saying, oh, everything's going pretty well. When's the next shoe going to drop? Right.
Mm.
I've got in the back of my mind that things aren't ever great for long because the world is full of turmoil and conflict. And I start to feel this dread, like, okay, right. And I don't really get to enjoy the happiness and the joy that's going on in those moments. And so the idea that you were alerted to by somebody else, that, where you had come from, and where you had gotten, and then able to share that with your son,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully you can share that with your family as well, in the right spirit. But I like
Yeah.
that idea of taking a moment, and maybe that's something we should do at maybe during the holidays, or is to identify, okay, when are we going to do this as a family? And for us, it's been on my wife's birthday is where we do that now. We have this tradition we've created where I go buy a bunch of hot air balloons, and we all write mom a message. Not hot air balloons, but you know what I'm talking about, balloons that float.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the individual ones. And we all take markers out and write on there a message to her, and we all release them up on her birthday. And it's a fun little tradition, but it gives us a chance to take a step back and, first of all, talk to her a little bit. Each of my kids can kind of write messages, do those things. And sometimes they share them, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're a little too personal. But it's also a chance for us to get together as a family and then sit down and then kind of review the past year, kind of go through some of the struggles, some of the joys, talk about how where we're at and what we're going to be doing. And it's probably not a bad idea to take some time as a family or as a group to decide, when are we going to have that be our time to do that?
Right.
Because I think it matters that we can focus on the happiness or the joy periodically.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of put some wind under our sails, so to speak.
Yeah. It's I think it's one of those things that we it's really hard to take time set aside for that purpose. I do find myself feeling blessed at different moments, but I don't do a great job of pulling other people into this my world of looking around and just being in awe at what my Father in heaven's blessed me with. And just as an example, yesterday it was the Sabbath. We went to church. We came home. We had a group. We had some friends and family come over because they had traveled into town to see Hyatt give his talk. And then after everyone had left, then my kids, basically my family, we started doing scripture study, and we had my brother-in-law who was hanging out with us. He decided to stay and join us, and as I'm sitting there and the scripture, I try my best to do a couple things. When I teach, I know it's probably not popular, but my first goal is to be engaging or entertaining. That's number one. It's and everybody says, "Hey, you got to teach with the Spirit." I'm like, "That's great. That's wonderful." But if you're teaching with the Spirit and they're not engaged or entertained, they're not gonna it's not going to go in. So I have my priorities different, and I have recognized I'm unique. But as I'm sitting there doing scripture study, one of the things I do for scripture study is I try and have it start, and then I try and have it end, and having it, hey, we're ending. This is when we're ending. Let's go. And last night, when it was time to, I said, okay, well, let's discuss these things, and then we'll stop. They just kept discussing it. And I looked around and I was wondering in my mind, I was like, as a teenager, this would have been frustrating to me. I would have been wanting to get out of there. I'd already been at church for 2 hours, and now I'm having to sit here through a gospel discussion where people are talking about things. And I looked around and all of my kids were engaged and talking and throwing out their own ideas. And then my brother-in-law, my wife said something about, well, isn't it a commandment to have joy? And he said something sarcastic, and the room erupted in joyous laughter. And it was so, I felt so blessed internally looking at my family and recognizing I had one of those families I didn't think was possible growing up. One where they are all engaged, even the rebellious ones, right? I have rebellious children, and yet
Sure.
they were participating and enjoying and thriving. And so I I just reveled in it, but I didn't bring anyone else in. I didn't say, look at this, because it kind of feels almost prideful. It feels almost wrong to celebrate how great God is. And I don't know if that's a me thing or if it's a real thing or not, but it feels it's hard for me to do. So maybe it means I need to do it because it's hard.
I would suggest a couple things. If you do it too often, it loses its impact, right?
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, or it becomes corny. You know, kids,
Sure.
their corny meters go off pretty quick. So the idea that here's what I found with each of my kids is if I have my kids together and I say, "You guys are great. This is great," it's okay. And I don't do that very often. I really find I single them out when I'm just with them.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And just talk to them personally about the wonderful things they bring to our family and those kind of things. So I'm more of the and I think it's probably because I'm just generally buoyant and I've overdone. I think I overdone it in the past. And Shelly said, "Okay, that's enough. You don't need to. Every time we get together, you don't need to tell them how. You know what I mean?" And
Sure.
so I'm a little conscious of it. But I think the one-on-one moments are where I like to do more in-depth stuff too, right? And it's I think it engineers an opportunity for when you tell your kids how what a blessing they are to you. It engineers an opportunity for them to talk with you more, right? Because when they're feeling love, they're obviously going to be more well open to conversation and all those kind of things anyway.
Yeah.
Which are, different kids are different. Some kids will talk to you, some kids won't.
Yep. That's
Uh,
true.
and we've talked about this before. It's every kid is different. Every situation is different, right?
Yep.
So, but I do like what you said. Being led by the Spirit, just deciding in those moments what's the best way to um, what's the best way to share your joy with your kids, right? Because I've got one kid I know for sure. If we're all sitting around doing the right things for the right reason, I say, I can't believe this is what I dreamed of, and you guys are all doing the right things for the right reasons. Uh, I've got one kid that I know that would say, "You're just trying to kiss my rear end right now so that I'll do more of this and less of that." I know I've got one kid specifically that is where his mind would go immediately.
Uh-huh. That's fun.
And so I've got to, you know what I'm saying? He's like, "Oh, I see what you're doing, Dad. You're trying to
Mm-hmm.
manipulate the situation so I'll fall into line more instead of being my true self, which is not, which, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right? I think we all have those kids. And,
Yep. I do. And
yeah.
what's fun is I
So
agree with her quickly. I was like, yeah, you
yeah,
bet I am. And
that's right. Yeah.
wouldn't you want me to do that? Because it's going to be better for you. And I hope you do this for your kids. What's wrong with that?
Right.
Anyway, you say it as if it's an
Ye-
accusation that I'm not pleased with.
Right.
Is
Right.
anything I'm
Right.
saying wrong? Is anything I'm saying false? If not,
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't even tell them that Santa Claus was a thing because I didn't want them to ever have something in their head that I lied to them about. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm like, absolutely. That's not my main purpose. I was trying to express gratitude, but if that's going to help you do more of this stuff, then I'm going to start doing it more.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Well, and now that we've talked about the looking back side of it,
yeah.
and seeing the good, there's also the risk of looking back and realizing, yeah. And
Yeah.
so that can be a challenge for me right now, right? In some cases, I
Sure.
don't mind looking back, and I'm pretty good about focusing on the good,
Mhm.
you know. But it, I think naturally those kind of things cross our mind. If I look back at our family 5 years ago and our family now, I'm like, holy crap, it's just not this. You know what I mean? There's a whole lot of ways I can spin it, and
Right.
it's naturally that are painful for me
Yep.
if I'm not really careful about it. So,
Sure.
and I'm usually pretty good. I'm usually pretty good about if I'm going to use contrast, I'm going to use it in a productive way for myself. But I
Right.
know not everybody's like that. Some people compare and contrast is they're never going to live up to what they want or expect. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
There's
And so
that
that can be
quote
one
that
of the
says,
challenges with that.
comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah, yeah,
And yet,
yeah,
sometimes
yeah.
comparison is a good kick in the rear end, and sometimes
You
it's
know,
a
if you're able to look at it like that, if you're able to look at it and say, you know what, I really haven't progressed as much as I thought I would in 5 years. You know, what can I, pay attention to outcomes, right? Where,
mhm.
in what areas do I need to make a change that are going to get me better outcomes in the next 5 years, right?
Right.
And you and I have talked about that where I think sometimes people are afraid. I don't really like the word failure. I don't think it's a great term, although it doesn't bother me. I
Mhm.
think outcomes are a lot easier to look at, right? And just
Right.
say, okay, if I'm doing this and the outcome is this, and it's not an outcome I care for, what changes am I going to make that
Right.
are going to hopefully lead to better outcomes? And so I think that's one way to look at it. If you're not happy with where you're at, which who really is in a lot of cases, right? I mean, we're all grateful for where we're at, and we know we've learned and grown. But I didn't really particularly want to grow in this area. I'm going to have to figure out some different areas that I've,
Yeah. Can I
you know,
choose different?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't think life works like that, Karen. I don't think we get to choose what areas of growth we get to
I wanted to
experience, and
grow
I'm
in
sure we
that
do in
guy's
some cases.
area. I want
Yeah,
to
yeah,
grow
yeah,
in. I had a pretty interesting early development as a child because I had such a horrible speech impediment. It was very difficult to educate me because verbally, that's how you have kids respond. And I was nonsensical words. No one could understand me. I remember one time in church, they had me come up to the front and they said, "What's your name?" And I said, "It was Cameron." And they said, "Kevin?" I was like, "No, Cameron." And they're like, "What?" And so I said, "Cameron." And they're like, "Brian?" I was like, "What? How can you not understand me? I'm saying it so clearly." Anyway,
right.
realized then, oh wow, people really can't understand me at all. But I would go to the resource room. So I'd go to speech, um, and then I would go to the resource room, and I always wanted to do the stuff I was good at. And I
Yeah,
hated the fact that they wanted me to work on the things that I was horrible at. And
right.
yet, that's what, thank goodness they did. And every now and again, they would throw in letting me count money because I could count money better than all the other kids. But yeah,
Sure.
you're laughing. I'm thinking of the other guys I was in the resource room with, and oh boy, I, my heart, I was like the big man in the resource room, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah. The king of the 5-year-olds. That's what I
That's
call it.
right.
When, yeah, yeah. I'm the king of the 5-year-olds. That's I. It's interesting you say that because um, I can't remember if it was you, Cameron, and you might not have done this on purpose, but you brought something to my attention. No, no, it wasn't you. It was another guy.
Phew,
But
dodged
yeah,
that
but
bullet.
this time it was another guy. You brought a lot of things to my attention, but I was talking to him about something, and it was pretty personal, and it was just it was when there was a time when I was just kind of waiting to die. I just really wasn't.
Mm,
I mean, it was tough, and I
yeah.
wanted to be with Shelly so bad that I was battling this internal, you know, cycle of, if I don't take care of myself, then I'll die quicker, and I can be with her quicker, and I can I can just fade into nothing, and I'll be with her, and it was
Yeah.
and it was seemed like a reasonable thing, because of the pain I was struggling with, right? And
Right.
I came out, I kind of have come out the other side. There's still parts of me that feel that way sometimes, and it's a challenge I'll probably face for a while, I would imagine, maybe even
Yeah.
till the very end. But
Sure.
um, I was sharing that with him, and he said to me, "What a waste of talent." And I said, "What?" That was his response to me
Hmm.
wanting to die. What a waste of talent. And I thought, well, that's just cold and heartless for him to say that. That
Right.
was my first thought. But then I went and I started thinking about it. I talked about this last week. Sometimes when things bother you, they should
Yep.
bother you and you should pay attention, right? And the more I
Yeah.
thought about it, the more I realized that he saw a talent in me that I didn't really see in me, because he identified a talent that he had seen that I was going to waste if I'm not here, you know? And that statement made me um, realize that I'm with some of the things that are harder. Like, some things come naturally to me, and those are the things I tend to just run towards, like you said. But
Yep.
there's other things that there's talent there that's unrealized, and he saw that, and he brought it to my attention, and I'm like, holy crap, I'm the guy who's burying that talent, and I really, because it's hard. That's a hard one for me. So I've just buried it, and I'm running with the ones that I'm comfortable with and
The
have
ones you like.
worked
Yeah.
on. The ones I like. That's a great way to say it, right? Because I know there are certain areas where I can excel and I can run and I can do good things. And this one's not one of those ones. It's one of the ones where I'm like, I kind of knew it, but I kind of didn't know it. And I didn't really want to know it because I wasn't really pursuing it, you know, but by bringing it to my attention, he made me realize that it brought it to the forefront for me. Now I've got to, okay, if I don't do something with this, then I'm really not fulfilling, the talent that Heavenly Father's given me. And I really need to buckle down and do the hard stuff, right?
Yeah.
The hard stuff I don't really want to do. And it reminded me of the guy who prays for patience, and then struggles when he's faced with all these challenges that require patience.
Give me patience now.
Give me patience right now, right? And then he's, be careful what you pray for, right?
Yeah.
Because then he's challenged with all these things that require patience, and he has to learn it, you know. But the things that make us learn those things aren't really necessarily they're typically not the fun things in our lives that, at least right now, are bringing us kind of joy that we want to continually experience. So
Yeah. So then, how would you go about pulling other people into your joy? Because for probably the last year, 9 months, my family's been overwhelmed with joy. And, you know, there was a part of me that didn't say anything for the good, a good long portion of that time because I did not want
yeah,
to, didn't want to.
yeah, you don't want to, yeah,
I actually, you know what it was? Okay, so back when all the stuff was hitting the fan, and we'd had someone break their back, Mary broke her back, and then things started. Hyatt the same weekend broke his hand, had to have surgery on his hand, and then Rebecca had to have a jaw bone graft, all in the same. That was within a 2 week period of time. Okay, I was like, okay. People ask, how are things going? I'm like, oh, things are going way better now. Because compared to that which we had just gone through, it was way better. And then immediately after that, things got hard again. And so we kept having it. Our normal life was things were going great. We'd have a little dip, great. Everything's awesome. We're blessed. Everything's fine. Little dip, back to everything great. Then it turned into tragedy and hardship and heartbreak with just little tiny, barely little nubs above
Yeah.
horrible things. And so when it had been a while, so I stopped talking about, I stopped giving real answers for real. I mean,
Hmm.
people would ask how things were going. I'd be like, well, because I don't want to say things are
Yeah.
great because they weren't. And I'm, come up with the weirdest answers. How are things? Kick in the pants. That that
Yeah.
one, I love that one. It's like, what's that mean? Well, I'm not going to tell you. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. And I don't think they're asking, they're just asking out of politeness anyway, in most cases. How
yeah,
you
in
doing is a
most
common
cases,
greeting. They don't
yes,
want to hear
exactly.
your sob stories. Yeah.
Well, let me
Yeah.
tell you. Do you have 2 hours?
Yeah. You can't
So
believe it. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So
You think you got
over,
it bad. Look at this scar.
yeah. Oh yeah, I got a 6 incher on this. So
That's right.
after a couple months of things going well, I was just ready for it to go back to bad.
Yeah.
And then another month of going well, and then my daughter started getting engaged to young men that I love, and th- so then then it was kind of nice because the focus went from tragedy, heartache, horrible, unnatural things happening to my family to the uniqueness of having three daughters get engaged and get married in the same year. That was a neat distraction.
Right.
But then things kept getting better and better.
Mhm.
And then my daughters got married, and I experienced for the first time I had the best, my favorite day of my life was watching my daughter get married. That day was the best day I've ever had. And so then when people were, I was waiting for someone to ask me, hey, how's it going? So I could say, it's going
Yeah.
awesome. Right.
Right.
But I didn't pull anybody into it. And then another wedding the next week. And now my son serving a mission. I mean, there's a song that I love is, life could not be better. It is like, this is as good as it could possibly be. And it's just continuing like that. And sure, we have
Right.
our problems. We're right now, my whole family, we're praying for transportation because our cars are awful. My daughters and her husbands, their cars have broken down. And, my son is going to be serving a service mission and he needs transportation. We're trying to figure that out. Life is still the way it is, but it is amazingly awesome right now. And I don't know how to pull people into that. And I don't know how to share it without it being
Mhm.
like, hey guys, our life is really good. you know, I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah. I had an experience years ago, um, where I started posting stories about Eric, my more severe son on the spectrum. When things would go well, I would write them up and share them.
Yeah.
Or when I'd have, I would share stories about my son playing football and being a great guy. He's a big, tall kid, and he's aggressive, and he's violent on the football field. And then when he comes home, he checks on me, and and it was, and I had a guy come to me or say, you know, he hated how social media was just about people bragging about their situation, right? Which
Oh,
we all see. They
interesting.
go on vacations and they post
Sure.
pictures, and it was kind of, I felt like he pointed that at me, and I know he didn't,
Right.
but I felt when he said that, I felt that, you know, and so I thought about that a little bit, and I realized for me, a lot of what I was doing was I was trying to show people that even though things are going wrong, and even though there's challenges, you can still be happy, and it's possible, right?
Yes.
I mean, because I think sometimes people get mired in the pain of things, and they see other people celebrating, and they're like, if I could just, if I could do that, right?
Yep.
And I wrote this guy, and I said, hey, the reason I do what I do is I want other families to see that it's possible. It's not that I'm bragging, although it's a underhanded, sneaky way of getting away with that.
Yeah.
There is pride in having great kids, right? There's
Yeah.
there's there's something to be said about. your kids making great decisions and doing the right things and being proud of them for those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I also told them, hey, everything can go horribly wrong tomorrow. I realize that. You know what I'm saying? And I might have a kid in the basement right now preparing to kill me. I just don't know it yet. I mean, I'm not saying I'm above any of it, right?
Right.
Um, the other thing that when as you were talking about that crossed my mind is really is you know, and this became I've always been a good about documenting stories in our family and events. And I've always been really good about writing down about the pain and struggle, but then saying, how am I going to escape, or what are my plans to move forward with hope and courage and faith? And I think it really became super evident to me after Shelley passed away. And I would sit in my bed and write every night. I would write stories about her, and I was in the middle of that tragedy, and that the pain and suffering was overwhelming. But
Mm-hmm.
because I was writing about it, the overwhelming pain and the suffering, and then saying, I know I've got help. I know my Heavenly Father is going to support me. I know why I'm here. I know that this is just a moment in my life that I'll have to face, and I'll see her again. And I think what it did was it gave me documenting those things, really. I think, I think you said you're not a writer, but you do have a writer in your family, right? Which is,
Yes.
or somebody that does
My
like to
oldest
write.
daughter.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. And
And
so I'm not saying it's the
luckily,
best.
number 1 and number 5 are
Yeah.
both documenting it. So we're getting two perspectives: the adult
Yeah.
perspective and the teenager perspective.
Which not only is that cool, but it doesn't mean you have to draw people in the moment either, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what you write can last for a long time. I mean, it can
That's
last
true.
forever ultimately. That documented those experiences. I mean, what would we be doing if those people who crossed the pioneers who crossed the plains didn't write about it?
Yeah.
It would be legend. We might think there was like dragons attacking them or something. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
I, that's the reality of the situation, right? Because it would be this story that gets adjusted, and we know how stories change and they get untrue and they get glamorized and they turn into something that they weren't, but when we're
Right.
documenting those things, the other thing that I really believe in, and I truly, truly believe in this, is that, I feel like I have a responsibility, and this is just me personally. When I see good in other kids or people or their families, I'm going to tell them, because I think that is the way that we can share our joy. When things are going good for us, that's the time we need to start serving others. And well, sometimes the best way to serve is to pay attention to what is good around us in other families, and say, hey, I'm seeing that. I
Mm-hmm.
see what your kids are doing, and that's fantastic. I'm noticing your joy. And that's a great way for us to just, because that's always happening around us. The individual that came up to you after your son's talk said, tell me this.
Mm-hmm.
And it just reminded you, and it gave you another opportunity to feel that joy at a higher level that you may or may not have had the opportunity to. So my the anniversary of my wife's passing is coming up in October, so
Yeah.
a couple of months away. It's going to be 3 years, Cameron, and it's
Wow.
shocking to me sometimes.
Yeah.
And um, after the first year, when the first year anniversary came up, I was scared to death when October was getting close.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I can't disappear for a month, but I could feel the weight of it. And so I remember thinking, what can I do to face it? You know what I mean? And I remember
Mm-hmm.
thinking, you know what? Shelley beautified everything she touched. So maybe there's a way I can uh, ask people to help me beautify, or to carry on her legacy somehow through this
Yeah.
month. And I came up with a plan, and I implemented this plan, and I watched, and it was really wonderful to watch other people. I challenged people. I said, hey, find somebody that you're thinking of that needs a call, that you need to tell you love them. Do that today, right? And people reported back to me, and it just uplifted me beyond belief that they were able to do that and beautify other people's lives. And so I think a big part of what we can do is sometimes it's going to be hard for us to suck them into our joy,
Mm-hmm.
but to find their joy and help them see it or tell them you see it, there's no pride in that whatsoever, right? That's just saying, hey, dude, I see you doing this, or I saw your son or your daughter, or I, I caught a couple that I go to church with one day sharing a sweet kiss in the parking lot. Just a sweet kiss.
Mm-hmm.
And it overwhelmed me.
Yeah.
I was like, holy crap. And it was just so beautiful. A little bit later on, the next week at church, I saw him and I said, hey, man, I got to tell you something. I caught you, brother. He said, what'd you catch me doing? I said, I saw you kissing your sweet wife in the parking lot. And he's like, what? And I said, you have no idea what that did to my heart. It just made me so happy.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't know what you're going to do with it. Tell your wife if you want to, or don't tell her if you don't want to. But you did something for me that I want you to know you did it for me in that moment. And he and I had a pretty emotional moment together because of something I saw. And I think he would, it gave me the opportunity to share with him how he's changed my life, improved my life. And I have a feeling it did something for him too. Right. And so we have the opportunity to do that all over the plot of the time. There's a lot of good stuff going on around us, and it's not hard to catch people. If you look at church, if you watch at church, how people talk to each other, or how couples look at each other, or, a dad walking out with a screaming kid and the dad is smiling,
Yeah.
to me, that's so great, because he could be mad and angry and frustrated, but he's smiling and he's carrying out a kid that's screaming bloody murder. I'm going to run to that guy and say, dude, I saw that. That was so great. He's like, I can't
Yep.
stop. No, no, no. The kid has nothing to do with it. Your smile told me everything I needed to know about how you're trying to do what's right in that heightened, crazy, could have made you a lot of things moment, but it made you smile. And so there's things, if looking for those things, we'll find them. And if we find them, it's really a good idea to say something, just figure out how to say it in a spirit of love. And I think that adds to other people's joy, and maybe it will remind them, because people have done it to me. People have come up to me and they've reminded me and said kind things to me, and it's reminded me, of the joy that I have in my life, and we need that. We all need that from each other.
That's awesome. So, takeaways, um, catch other people doing something good and joyous and bring it to their attention that you noticed so that they can maybe internally go, oh, yeah, that's right. It is this way. And there is joy. I love that. Also, you know what? I think I'm going to post on Facebook. I don't think I've been on for 6 months or so. I'm going to just write a post and say, hey, a lot of you know the hardship we've been through. If you want to read some of the goodness, continue reading. If you don't want to, because, don't,
Yeah,
this is going to be full of sappy joy stuff. So
I
please
love it.
skip it if needs be. I think I'll do that before next week because I feel it feels like I don't have as much gratitude as I need to have if I'm not sharing it with others. It's
Right,
almost like I'm not a worthy recipient because this is coming from God. It's not like, oh, hey, look how great the Watsons are.
right,
It's like, whoa, look how blessed we are. And some of you know little bits and pieces of what we went through. Nobody knows it all. In fact, yeah, nobody does, including our own kids.
right,
They can't know. Sarah and I together have a fairly good idea of most of the stuff, but even that, we're still missing bits and pieces because we know that our adult children stopped sharing stuff with us that were hard because they didn't want to add to our burden.
right,
So,
right. Yeah,
anyway, I think it's good. I'm going to do a post. Just going to do and it's going to be in preparation for Thanksgiving coming up. And it's just the precursor. Thanksgiving's the best holiday. It's my favorite holiday. You can try and disagree with me, but there's nothing there's nothing as great as to get together to celebrate being grateful. And Christmas is commercialized, and there's the whole Santa
Right.
versus Christ thing. And then New Year's is like, well, have fun with your party, but be careful because of all the drunks on the road.
Right.
And
Right.
there's nothing about Thanksgiving. And don't get me going on Halloween, but it's the, hey, give me something or I'm going to do something to you with a trick. I'm not a fan of that one as much. So
Yeah.
I'm getting excited about Thanksgiving, leading into the celebration of Christ, leading into the new year of, hey, I'm going to change. And
Yeah.
because of what Christ did and my gratitude for what he's done, I'm going to try and do more this coming year and change even more. So
Well, and
I'm going to get a post done.
I think the approach, and I just realized this as you were talking, Cameron. The approach I think I take and I want to take is that these things that are good are gifts,
Yeah.
right? It's not something I deserve.
Nope.
It's not something I work to achieve. It's gifts, right? So many of the things we
Mm-hmm.
receive in our lives are just gifts. Right? We can do the same thing and fail, 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 and but if we look at our blessings as gifts, overwhelmingly as gifts, there's no pride in
Mm-hmm.
receiving a gift. You know what I'm saying? It's it's
Yeah.
it's humbling to think that we've been given so many gifts. And if we write it with
Yeah.
that attitude as opposed to here's how great my life is because I've worked hard and deserve it, it changes the way we write it. It changes the way we see it. And I think
Yep.
it's always going to get us better outcomes to realize that sure we work hard, sure we try a lot of stuff, but it's really just a bunch of gifts, and we just need to be grateful for the gifts we receive, right? And
Yeah.
that becomes a humbling experience as opposed to feeling prideful about something like that, right? These are gifts.
Agreed.
Yeah. So good stuff, Cameron.
Well, I think that's a great place to end it. Thanks,
Sounds good,
Kyle.
Cameron. Thanks, Cameron.